Good morning everyone. Myself Dr. Utkarsh Sanghvi, working as a senior resident at the Department of Cardiovascular and Thoracic Surgery at UN Mehta Institute of Cardiology and Research Center, Ahmedabad. Today I will be talking on intra-aortic balloon pump. So what is IABP or the intra-aortic balloon pump? It is the most widely used circulatory assist device in critically ill patients with cardiac disease. The primary goal of IABP is to improve the ventricular performance of the failing heart by facilitating an increase in the myocardial oxygen supply and decreasing in myocardial oxygen demand. With the advances in technology such as percutaneous insertion, use of a small diameter catheters, sheathless insertion techniques and enhanced automation, all these advances have permitted the use of counter pulsations in a variety of settings with greater efficacy and safety. Coming to the history, it was long back in 1952 when Kantrowitz described augmentation of coronary blood flow by retardation of the arterial pressure pulse in animal models. 6 years later, in 1958, Harkin suggested that removal of some blood from the femoral artery during systole and replacing the same volume rapidly in diastole can be used as a treatment for LV failure, which was so called as diastolic augmentation. In 1962, Mavlopoulos and his team developed an experimental prototype of IABP whose inflation and deflation were timed to the cardiac cycle. In 1968, again Kantrowitz reported improved systemic arterial pressure and urine output with the use of IABP in 2 subjects with cardiogenic shock. Out of this, only one survived and went home out of the hospital. In 1979, percutaneous IABPs were introduced, and shortly after this, Bergman and his colleagues described the first percutaneous insertion of IABP. The first pre-folded IABP was developed in 1986. Now first we will study what is counterpulsation. It is nothing but a term which describes that balloon inflation in diastole and deflation during early systole. Balloon inflation causes volume displacement both proximally and distally. This leads to the increase in the coronary blood flow and also increases the systemic perfusion by augmentation of the intrinsic Wind-Kessel effect. So because of this Wind-Kessel effect, the potential energy stored in the aortic root during systole is converted to the kinetic energy with the elastic recoil of the aortic root. Here in these diagrams, you can see the blue diagram shows how the Wind-Kessel effect is used for the in fires by fire brigade people. And in second, you can see the potential energy stored in the aortic root which gets converted into the kinetic energy during systole and thus helps in systemic perfusion. Now what are the effects of IABP? It causes improvement in the LV function. It also improves RV function but by improving the myocardial blood flow only. It also reduces LA and the pulmonary vascular pressures, reduces RV afterload. Since the IABP inflates at the onset of the diastole, it increases the diastolic pressure and deflates just before the systole, thus reduces the LV afterload. This inflation and deflation we will be discussing in the subsequent slides. What factors determine these effects? So there are 3 factors. The first one is the balloon volume. So it is directly proportional to the volume of the balloon. The more the volume of the balloon, the more will be the displacement of the blood. Second is the heart rate. Heart rate is inversely proportional to this effects. More the heart rate, lesser will be the effect of the IABP. And third is aortic compliance. This is also inversely proportional. As the aortic compliance increases, the magnitude of diastolic augmentation decreases and the SVR also decreases. IABP also decreases the systolic blood pressure by 20%. It also increases aortic diastolic pressure by around 30%, increases the mean aortic pressure, reduces the heart rate by 20%, decreases the mean pulmonary capillary wedge pressure by 20%, increases the cardiac output by 20% and increases the renal blood flow by around 25%. This is a diagram which shows like inflation occurring in the diastole. Because of the inflation occurring in diastole, there is augmentation of the diastolic pressure, there is increased perfusion of the coronaries and there is increased myocardial oxygen supply. Because of the deflation in the systole, there is decrease in the afterload, decrease in the cardiac work output, decrease in the myocardial oxygen consumption and increase in the cardiac output. Now we'll discuss the indications of IABP. So in patients with cardiogenic shock, especially patients who are in shock due to acute MI, or patients with mechanical complications of myocardial infarction like acute ischemic MR or ventricular septal rupture. Also, it can be inserted preoperatively in patients undergoing CABG, where the patients in patients with severe LV dysfunction or patients with intractable ischemic arrhythmias, and postoperatively if the patient is in cardiogenic shock. It can also be used in non-surgical revascularizations where the patients are unstable after MI or high-risk coronary interventions such as severe LV dysfunction, left main coronary artery disease or a very complex coronary artery disease. And it can also be used as a bridge to transplant in patients who are awaiting a cardiac transplant. It can also be used in post-infarct angina and for intractable ventricular arrhythmias. The contraindications can be divided into two, absolute and relative. Moderate to severe aortic regurgitation is an absolute contraindication. Aortic dissection, already a history of implanting aortic stent, or an end-stage heart disease with no anticipations of recovery are the absolute contraindications. Relative contraindications include abdominal aortic aneurysm, uncontrolled septicemia, uncontrolled bleeding diathesis, severe bilateral peripheral artery obstructive disease and tachyarrhythmias. Coming to the technique of IABP insertion, the IABP device per se has two major components. The first is a double lumen catheter with a balloon which is attached at its distal end, and second is a console with a pump which drives the balloon. The balloon is made up of polyethylene and is inflated with the gas, which is the gas is driven by the pump. So usually we use the helium gas because it is of low density, which allows it for its rapid transfer of the gas from the console to the balloon, and it is also easily absorbed in the bloodstream in case of the rupture of the balloon. The IABP kit consists of an introducer needle, a guide wire, vessel dilators, a sheath, IABP itself, gas tubings, 60 ml syringe, a 3-way stopcock, and arterial pressure tubing, which might sometimes not be present in the kit. So this is a chart showing approximately of what size IABP balloon you should use which is decided with the height of the patient. For a height of patient over 6 feet or more than 183 centimeter, we use a 50 cc balloon. For a patient with height of 5 feet 4 inch up to 6 feet, which is around 163 centimeter to 183 centimeter, we use around 40 cc balloon. For a patient with height of 5 feet to 5 feet and 4 inches, approximately of height of 152 centimeter to 163 centimeter, we use a 34 cc balloon. And for patients who are less than 5 feet or less than 152 centimeter, we use 25 cc balloon. There is a separate formula to calculate the balloon size for the use of IABP in children, which we will be describing later. So technique of IABP insertion. First, the IABP catheter is inserted percutaneously into the femoral artery, most common site. There are various other sites also which we will be discussing, but the femoral artery is the most common site which we routinely use. So I will be describing the technique of insertion to the femoral artery. So the IABP catheter sheet is inserted percutaneously into the femoral artery through an introducer using the modified Seldinger techniques. Other routes include subclavian artery, axillary artery, brachial, iliac artery, or sometimes directly into the aorta if the chest is open. The catheter can be inserted surgically using a transthoracic or also by a translumbar approach, but this is associated with an increased peri-procedural mortality. So routinely we don't use, and it's very rarely used, not routinely, it's very rarely used. Once the vascular access is obtained, the balloon catheter is inserted and advanced, usually under fluoroscopic guidance, into the descending thoracic aorta, with its tip generally placed 2 to 3 cm distal to the left subclavian artery or at the level of the carina. So routinely in ICU and OT, we do it routinely under TE guidance. So the technician helps us to guide the balloon tip. The outer lumen of the catheter is used for the delivery of the gas. As I have described previously, that we use a double lumen tube, so it has an outer lumen and an inner lumen. The outer lumen is used for the delivery of the gas to the balloon, and the inner lumen can be used for monitoring systemic arterial pressure. The diameter of the balloon when fully expanded should not exceed 80 to 90% of the diameter of the patient's descending thoracic aorta. So this is why the height and the balloon sizes have been described. On X-rays, you can see, I have told you that it should be, the tip should be around 2 to 3 centimeter distal to the origin of the left subclavian artery or maybe in the carina. This is an X-ray with a red arrow pointing where the tip of the IBP is placed. Generally, it's in the second or third intercostal space. You can find it here. This is the IBP kit. The down figure shows the console, and the upper diagram shows the IBP balloon and its the two lumens and the balloon itself. This is the IBP machine with the trace, the waveforms of the pressure and the waveforms of the IBP augmentation with the normal systolic pressure, augmented systolic pressure and the mean pressure. The various triggers you can see, which I'll be describing later, augmentation, where you can see the augmentation. Now coming to the how to time the IBP machine. So IBP timing refers to the inflation and deflation of the intra-aortic balloon in relation to the cardiac cycle. The cardiac cycle is monitored by continuous display of the arterial pressure form. As the balloon inflates at the onset of the diastole, a sharp and deep V is observed at the dicrotic notch. Here you can see between the points C and D, just before the dicrotic notch, the balloon inflates and you can see a sharp V on the arterial waveform. The balloon is said to inflate after the aortic valve closure, which corresponds to the dicrotic notch I have shown you in the figure, and deflate immediately before the opening of the aortic valve, which corresponds to the point just before the upstroke of the arterial pressure form. So here you can see the deflation occurs just before the systole. The balloon inflation causes augmentation of the diastolic pressure and a second peak is observed. You can see in the previous diagram that the second peak, the D point is more than the C, so the augmented BP is more than the patient's systolic BP. The peak is referred to as the diastolic augmentation. Diastolic augmentation is ideally higher than the patient's systolic pressure, except when there is reduced stroke volume causing a relative decrease in the augmentation. And depending on the patient's hemodynamic status, the balloon is programmed to assist either every bit, which we call it as 1:1 augmentation, or less if the heart rate is more or if the patient is not hemodynamically stable. The various other augmentation possible is like 1:2, 1:3, 1:4. And with the improvement in hemodynamics, the device can be weaned to a less frequent cycling before complete removal. Now we'll be talking about the various triggers. The triggers these triggers are nothing but the signals which indicate the IBP that the systole is occurring or is about to occur. So the triggers used can be either ECG or arterial or pacing and others or internal. So here the most commonly two used triggers are ECG and arterial waveforms, which I'll be describing now. First we'll talk about the ECG trigger. It is the best choice and the R wave signals electrical event prior to the systole. But this ECG trigger cannot be used when there is asystole or there is pulseless electrical activity, or the patient is on cardiopulmonary bypass with the plegia given, that is the patient is on, it means the heart is arrested. So in those cases we use arterial pressure or internal triggers. Next trigger is pressure trigger. So it is best for patients with asystole, pulseless electrical activity, or when there are artifacts or the patient is on cardiopulmonary bypass. It also times to the cardiopulmonary resuscitation compressions if they are strong enough to generate an arterial waveform. But the pressure trigger cannot be used if there is a loss of arterial line or there is an irregular heart rhythm, and because the deflation occurs very late on the premature bits. Now coming to the normal balloon pressure waveform. Two important points about the shape of the waveform are the width of the waveform corresponds to the duration of the balloon inflation during the cardiac cycle. So this is very important. The plateau of the waveform reflects pressure within the aorta when the balloon is inflated, and the balloon pump has to overcome the pressure within the aorta to fill the balloon with the gas. So the two important points are the width of the waveform and the plateau of the waveform. Now coming to the variations in the IABP waveforms. The first diagram shows how it looks in the tachycardia. So you can see that the waveform has reduced in time and the plateau phase is also reduced. Next diagram is bradycardia, where you see that the waveform has increased in the size and the plateau has also increased. Next is hypertension, where the BP is more than 250 around, and next is hypotension. This is just to know, no need, it's not very important in routine life. Next is how to manage a patient who has been put on IABP. So first of all, we should educate the patient of not being able to move or bend the leg with when the IBP is in situ. Next, special attention should be brought to the groin where we have inserted the IBP, especially to look for any bleeding or oozing. Peripheral perfusion should be checked either with a saturation probe or a hand Doppler to look for any the pulses. Look for any color changes in the limb. Look for bilateral pulses. Look for the temperature, whether it is warm, hot, capillary return, movement, and also sensory sensations are present or not. This should be attended on lower extremities, and circulation observation chart should be maintained every hour, not even 2 hours. Every hourly this has to be charted by the nurse or even by the duty doctor. Pressure area care 2 to 4th hourly as patient is immobilized. So ask for the change of the position to avoid any bad sore. Hourly hemodynamic observation should be recorded. Patient's nurse should be the patient should be kept at 30 to 45 degree head up, and also check the IBP site regularly for any signs of infection or change occlusive color clear dressings. So what investigations should the patient undergo when he is on IBP? Daily chest x-ray should be done to ensure correct placement of the IBP tip and ensure that it is not migrated. Daily pathological investigations like serum electrolytes, coagulation profile, urea, creatinine. Some institute prefer doing APTT every 6th hourly as the heparin infusion is going on for these patients. Some institutes prefer doing ACT. So either of the ACT or APT, whichever you are convenient, you can use. Daily ECG monitoring and more frequently as indicated by the patient's clinical status. Daily a CBC should be done because it causes hemolysis as well as thrombolysis, so the platelet count and the HB might drop. And careful monitoring of the renal function, because sometimes the balloon gets migrated and it is mobilized distally, so that sometimes it might occlude the renal arteries, causing reduced renal perfusion and increase in creatinine levels. Now coming to different scenarios, if the patient who was on IBP has a sudden cardiac arrest, so if counter pulsation is to be continued and synchronized to the CPR effort, then arterial trigger should be selected. So since there is no electrical activity, change the ECG trigger to the arterial trigger. If the CPR generates sufficient blood pressure, then in most cases the IBP will pump and may improve perfusion to both the coronaries and the carotid arteries. In the event that the CPR cannot generate a consistent and reliable trigger, then trigger signal generated by the IBP is available through the use of internal trigger mode. I have already described that internal trigger and pacing trigger, AV sequential pacing triggers. The other two triggers are there. We use it very rarely, so I have not described it in detail. So if possible, change it to the arterial trigger in a scenario of cardiac arrest, provided you are able to generate a good pressures after with your CPR. If you are not able to do it, change it to the internal trigger. And once the ECG arterial signal has been re-established, the trigger mode can be changed from the internal trigger to the acceptable patient trigger, either ECG or the arterial signal. Now suddenly a patient has a VT or a VF and the patient has to undergo defibrillation. Then the trigger, the patient needs to be defibrillated, has to be protected. Then ask the patient, ask the staff to stand clear of the patient, from the patient and the IBP, and you can give the shock. Now coming to various troubleshootings which can occur when the patient is on IBP. So I'll be describing them into the four most commonly used, most commonly occurring, either early inflation, late inflation, early deflation and late deflation. Early inflation implies that the inflation of the balloon is occurring before the aortic valve closure. Late inflation meaning the inflation of the IBP is occurring markedly after the closure of the aortic valve. Early deflation meaning there is premature deflation of the IABP during the diastolic phase itself, means not just before the systole, and the late deflation, meaning that the deflation is occurring after the onset of the systole. So coming to each one, in early inflation, the waveform the inflation will be occurring much before the dicrotic notch, as you can see in the figure, and the diastolic augmentation will be enriched onto the systole itself. So what will be the physiological effects? It causes potential premature closure of the aortic valve, potential increase in the left ventricular and diastolic volume and left ventricular and diastolic pressure or the pulmonary capillary wedge pressure, and it will also cause increased left ventricular wall stress, or there will be increase in the afterload, which is bad for the heart. Coming to the next thing, late inflation, meaning that the inflation is occurring after the closure of the aortic valve or after the dicrotic notch. As you can see that the upstroke or the V wave is not starting at the dicrotic notch, it is occurring much later, and so in this cases there will be absence of the sharp V, there will be suboptimal diastolic augmentation. This will lead to suboptimal coronary artery perfusion and also suboptimal systemic perfusion. Coming to the third thing, early deflation, meaning that the deflation is occurring well before the onset of the systole. So there will be sharp drop in the diastolic augmentation, as you can see in the figure. There will be suboptimal diastolic augmentation. Assisted aortic and diastolic pressure may be equal to or less than the unassisted aortic and diastolic pressure, and the associated systolic pressure may rise. The early deflation can cause suboptimal coronary perfusion. There may be a potential for retrograde coronary and carotid blood flow. Angina may occur as a result of retrograde coronary blood flow, and there will be suboptimal reduction of the afterload, meaning the use of IABP won't be very good. The main whole purpose is to reduce the afterload, thus reduce the myocardial oxygen demand, and second thing is to increase the myocardial oxygen supply. Late deflation, meaning the deflation is occurring well after the systole has started. So what you will find is that the rate of the assisted systole is prolonged, and the diastolic augmentation may appear widened. As you can see in early inflation, you can see there is sudden downfall, means after the diastolic augmentation the wave has suddenly dropped down. Here there will be like less steep, it becomes even more less steep. So the late deflation causes afterload reduction, which is essentially absent, and there will be increased mixed venous oxygen consumption due to increased left ventricular ejecting against a greater resistance, that is the afterload has increased, and a prolonged isovolumic contraction phase, and this may also impede the left ventricular function. Now coming to a very rare problem, that the catheter is kinking. How do you diagnose that the catheter is kinked? So you can see that the IABP waveform will be rounded on the top, and there will be absence of the plateau phase. So this kink may be either there might be a kink or obstruction of the subtle gas, there may be a kink in the catheter tubing, or there is an improper IABP catheter position. The sheet might not being pulled back to allow the inflation of the IABP, or the IABP itself is too large for the aorta, as I have described that it should never be more than the 80 to 90% of the diameter of the transthoracic aorta, and the IABP is not fully wrapped, or the water condensation in the external tubing is occurring. So what to do if the patient has a catheter kink? Reposition the patient, keep the affected leg straight, use roll towel under the hip to hyperextend the hip, apply slight traction to the catheter if the kinking at the insertion site or in the artery is suspected. The distal portion of the IABP may be in the sheath if a long introducer was used. So just pull back the sheath until the IABP bladder has exited the sheath. The introducer sheath might also be kinked, which in turn is kinking the balloon. So this is particularly suspected if the placement of the sheath was difficult. Pull back the sheath properly or rotate the sheath in a just partially, not fully, and check the placement of the balloon. It might sometimes be very high or maybe very low. So I have not described here, but sometimes what happens is like the balloon gets ruptured. So how to diagnose is like you will find the full balloon has got blood in it. So it will be filled with blood. So just remove the balloon after passing a guide wire and reinsert a new balloon. Now coming to what happens if sometimes the trigger is lost. So first of all, if the patient is on ECG trigger, check whether the ECG leads are proper, if the trace is coming properly. If the ECG trace is not proper, change the ECG electrodes, change the ECG cable, choose an alternate ECG lead or change to the pressure trigger. What is to be done if there is a loss of pressure trace? First of all, check whether the pressure bag is inflated properly. Generally, it is inflated to 300 millimeters of mercury. Check whether the arterial line is patent by withdrawing the blood and then flushing it. Check if the transducer is level to the phlebostatic axis. Now, how to wean the patient of IABP? First, assess if the cardiac index is around 2.2 to 2.5. Mean aortic pressure is more than 65 millimeters of mercury. There is a stable heart rate and patient has stable hemodynamics. So weaning is started only after if the above criteria are met, and we start reducing the frequency from 1:1 to 1:2 and then to 1:3. Generally, we don't keep the patients for a longer time at 1:3 frequency. The augmentation of the balloon should never be decreased for weaning due to increased risk of thrombosis. This is very important. When the ratio of the balloon is decreased each time, the patient's hemodynamics should be assessed before the next stage of weaning and is commenced. How to remove the IABP? Means we have weaned, now the plan is to remove the IABP. First of all, discontinue heparin 6 hours prior. Check platelets and coagulation factors. Some institutes don't stop heparin. They stop the heparin just few minutes before. But what the guidelines tell, we should stop heparin 6 hours prior and check platelets and the coagulation factors. Put the IABP on standby and then turn off, as this will allow the balloon to deflate passively. Disconnect the tubing from IABP to the pump, as this will help to deflate the balloon passively again. And remove the IABP, let the site bleed for 2 seconds to help to remove any thrombus if present. Apply manual pressure both above and below the IABP insertion site. Remove and alternate pressure to expel any clots if they are present. And apply constant pressure at the insertion site for a minimum of 20 to 30 minutes, depending on the patient's coagulation profile. Now coming to the complications of IABP. The patients who are at the greatest risk of developing complications after IABP insertions are female patients, patients who are diabetics, smokers or obese patients. Patients even with peripheral vascular disease, hypertension and higher stroke, high SVR or shock are also at risk of developing complications. Now what all complications can occur? The most common is transient loss of a peripheral pulse in the limb where the IABP was inserted. 2.9% patients have mild limb ischemia and 0.9% have major limb ischemia. There can be thromboembolism. Some patients may develop compartment syndrome. There are chances that the patient can develop aortic dissection. There may be local vascular injury in the form of aneurysm formation or a hematoma or bleeding. There are chances that the patient may have infection. There can be a balloon leak or a balloon rupture. As I have already described, you can diagnose it by the blood in the IABP line, and the treatment is you have to change the balloon. There can be balloon entrapment. There can be hematological complications like hemolysis or thrombocytopenia. There can be malposition causing cerebral or renal compromise. People have also seen complications like cardiac tamponade after IABP insertion. Now coming to the ACC AHA 2000 guidelines. So the evidence that class 2A and level of evidence B that the use of IABP can be helpful for patients with cardiogenic shock after ST elevation MI who do not quickly stabilize with pharmacological therapy. And according to ESC 2014 guidelines, IABP insertion should be considered in patients with hemodynamic instability or cardiogenic shock due to mechanical complications. And the routine use of IABP in patients with cardiogenic shock is not recommended. This is class of recommendation 3 and level of evidence A according to the ESC guidelines. So the update on IABP in unstable or angina or non-ST elevation MI 2007 and 2012. So class of recommendation 2A and level of evidence C, that the placement of IABP could be useful in patients with recurrent ischemia despite maximal medical management and in those with hemodynamic instability until coronary angiogram and revascularization is completed. Now we'll be describing around two trials which have been done previously on intra-aortic balloon pump. So first is the SHOCK trial, which was done in 1999. So in the SHOCK trial, it compared early revascularization with CABG or PCI. We have 152 patients who underwent revascularization with a strategy of initial medical stabilization for the patients who presented with cardiogenic shock, and there was no significant difference found between the treatment arms in the occurrence of the primary endpoint, and also had no difference at the 30-day mortality. However, the mortality trend observed at 30 days did reach statistical significance at 6 months. SHOCK 2 trial, which was done in 2012, where the intra-aortic balloon support for myocardial infarction was given with the patients with cardiogenic shock. This was published in New England Journal of Medicine in 2012. So this was a multi-center open-label randomized study which enrolled around 600 patients with acute MI, either ST or non-ST elevation MI, with cardiogenic shock if revascularization was planned. So the patients were randomized in a 1:1 ratio to either intra-aortic balloon pump or no intra-aortic balloon counterpulsation, or which was considered as the control group. So the primary study endpoint told that the 30-day all-cause mortality occurred in similar proportion in the IABP group as well as the control group, but by an intention to treat analysis. And there was no significant difference in the multiple secondary endpoints, which included serial assessment of serum lactate levels, creatinine, C-reactive protein levels, or the simplified acute physiological score. Now, the next trial is the BCIS-1, which was done in 2012-2013. BCIS stands for Balloon Pump Assisted Coronary Intervention Study. This was also a multi-center randomized control trial that randomly assigned around 301 patients with severe ischemic cardiomyopathy to receive elective IABP before PCI or to undergo PCI without planned IABP support. And the BCIS-1 study found that there was no difference in the frequency of the MACE events at the hospital discharge, although procedural complications occurred less often in elective IABP group as compared to the patients who underwent PCI without IABP support and required rescue IABP, means an emergency IABP was inserted. Coming to the third trial, CRISP-AMI trial, which was done in 2011. CRISP stands for Counterpulsation Reduces Infarct Size Pre-PCI, and it is the third recent randomized control trial addressing the use of IABP. So the trial examined the role of IABP in anterior segment elevation acute coronary syndrome without cardiogenic shock. It was a multi-center randomized trial which included 337 patients who were randomized in a 1:1 ratio to either IABP before PCI or PCI alone. And this study proved that there was no difference in the infarct size assessed by the cardiac MRI 3 to 5 days post MI, and which was the primary endpoint at the trial. And all-cause mortality at 6 months was also non-significant. So here we conclude by telling that IABP are extremely useful in stabilizing patients with complicated cardiac disease. Risk factors for complications with IABP are female sex, peripheral vascular disease, small BSA, and high increased age. Troubleshooting with waveform analysis is critical and is just as important as knowing how to insert an IABP. Prophylactic insertion of intra-aortic balloon pump for hemodynamic support in high-risk PCI patients may be superior to a rescue strategy. Controversy has arisen as to the utility of IABPs, but registry data, randomized data, and anecdotal data can be quoted to support their benefit. Thank you.